Hello, everybody. Welcome to Reddit Roast 22. Mal, great to see you again. Thank you very much for gathering a really interesting bunch of profiles today. We have a family business applicant with a GMAT center that's 1,000 kilometers away. So he's trying to figure out how to get his test. We've got an engineer with product management goals, which is classic engineering goals. So that's exciting. Someone with a sub 3.0 GPA, is that going to torpedo their applications? We shall see. And we have an athlete who is hoping for T10 schools. We'll see whether that's really on the cards for them. So, Mal, shall we dive right in then?
Yes, we shall.
Do it.
I really like profile one. I think it's a very unusual family business. Not seen this before. Um, do I have a real shot at Meditate with my MBA profile and school list? So they are 30. They're from Namibia. They've
Mhm.
originally studied biomedical sciences, finished with 3.7 GPA. They worked in health management before going to med school in the UK, but didn't complete med school, dropped out after the first year. Um, since then, like they said, life's taken a pretty wild turn. Uh, Took over the family business, which is a commercial fishing company. Looks like they've got major distribution deals going for them. They've been exporting to Costco, to Trader Joe's. Some really interesting work there. No extracurriculars that they've mentioned. Right now, I can't see any post MBA goals. Why an MBA? So what they want to do is they need the structure, network, and tools to continue the family business. They want to get into international business, logistics, and in the food and export space, and they want to grow this business, and that's why they need an MBA. Family location factor, they also want to move with their family. They've got a wife and son. So yeah, they want to settle down for 3 to 4 years after the MBA in the city where they're at. So that's also a priority. Schools
Mhm.
targeted: Rice Jones, Vanderbilt, Olin, Terry, UT Knoxville, Chattanooga, Arizona State, and UNC Charlotte. So among the T25 and below schools. And yes, what do you think about this profile? Remember they saying they're open to ridicule, to judgment, to critique, whatever you have coming for them.
All right, well, let's ridicule them then. No, I'm joking. I think it's quite a solid profile. Okay, starting from the academics then. So 3.7 GPA. I understand that that's been converted because obviously it's a UK. Oh no, it's med school in the UK. So this is biomed sciences. So I'm not completely clear if that's a US GPA or here. No, it says it in the bottom. My transcripts were evaluated by US Credential Service. So it's not actually a 3.7 in the US system, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a 3.7 equivalent, which is a solid GPA. Although, as it's not a GPA, it's not actually a US GPA grade, it won't be directly taken on by the schools, and therefore it doesn't carry quite as much weight. But it's still obviously a strong score. Now, no GMAT, GRE, that's going to be an issue. Difficult to judge the academics without that. But 3.7 is 3.7. It's solid. Okay, and then in terms of professionals, now I really like this family business narrative, Mal. I think this is
Yeah.
really, really nice. I think you see a lot. I mean, we see a lot of family business applicants, but they're more often things like real estate, maybe an engineering company. Having a commercial fishing business is really unique. That's something that they're not going to see very often, and that is definitely acting in OP's favor. Extracurriculars, again, not specified. I hope that because there's a family that extracurriculars haven't taken a back seat, sometimes happens. OP, if you're really seriously considering, top schools, that's possibly a gap in the profile that you need to think about. Maybe it's just you haven't mentioned it here, but focusing and showing some sort of community contribution, whether that might be through the family business, that would be a strengthener for your profile. Namibia, definitely underrepresented. That helps. And in terms of goals, look, I really like these goals, right? Anything that is sort of develop and build the family business, really focused in, locked in on international business, logistics, entrepreneurship, food and export space. Those are areas that are really well catered by MBA programs that are not especially represented in the demand side from applicants. In other words, you get a lot of investment bankers. You don't get many fishermen applying. So this is a really strong industry to be focusing on, included in your goals. And yeah, I really, really like it from a profile perspective.
OP has a few more specific questions. We can get into those. First is about scholarships. So does this story actually give him a decent chance at merit scholarships as an international student?
Look, if you're going to target merit scholarships, it's very difficult to do that without a GMAT score. So that's the key thing. I mean, yes, like potentially a merit scholarship could be on the cards, particularly from those lower ranked schools in the list, but it's going to be very difficult to argue that you deserve one without a GMAT score, right? Think about what schools mean by a merit scholarship is here, we're going to give you some money to bring you into the school to bring our GMAT average up. And if you haven't got a GMAT score, how are you going to bring the GMAT average up? So we'll talk about this more at length, but I think the GMAT is going to be key if scholarships are really what OP wants.
What about the GMAT center being, that's, I think, the main impediment. It's 1,000 miles away.
Look, every year we work with clients who have to get on a plane to take the GMAT. I worked with a client last year from Mauritania. I'm pretty sure he had to fly more than 1,000 kilometers for his test. Now, obviously, be strategic. If there's a GRE, if you can take the GRE more easily than the GMAT, then take the GRE. If there's an online option that you can do, then take the online option, right? You've got to be strategic about this, but not having a score because it's far away, honestly, is not really going to cut it. You're going to have a lot of other people from very remote places who are applying. And if they can do it, you can do it. And if a scholarship's important to you, don't rely on the waiver. So I see that was his comment, right? He's saying it's geographically challenging, so I'm seeking a waiver. Not if you want merit scholarship, you're not. It's going to be an issue there.
What about the schools that they've picked? Okay, so are any of them better when it comes to, for entrepreneurial type of candidates? Is it a realistic mix of reach versus safety?
Yeah, I think I've got a strong opinion on the second part. I think this is just generally quite a safe, probably too safe list of schools. I think OP, there's not going to be many Namibian applicants. And if OP can come up with a GRE or GMAT score that is not in the sort of north of 320 ballparks, it doesn't even need to be that strong. But if OP can come up with a decent score, then I think there's no reason why OP can't target T15, M7 schools. You might find it's a bit more difficult to get scholarships out of them. And so the lower ranked schools are possibly going to be more forthcoming with scholarship money. But I would argue, if you're offered an admit from a Kellogg or whatever, you would think hard about options to maybe borrow the money, for example. No, I think that's a very conservative list of schools. And, frankly, the exposure and the sort of the non-traditional entrepreneurial types, look, all schools have those to a slightly lesser degree. And I think the proxy for this is to look at the schools that have more consultants in the program, right? We know, for example, that schools like Goizueta, Tuck, Yale have north of 40% consultants. So almost by definition, then, there are going to be fewer non-traditional entrepreneurial types. So I would say approach this by focusing away from the schools that are heavily consulting based and going down the other end. And I think that really the answer here is to get yourself as high up the rankings as you can by getting a decent GMAT score.
Okay. I think we've covered all of OP's questions, and not much ridicule, just lots of sound advice.
No, not too much ridicule, I hope. OP, don't be disheartened.
Yeah.
I sense a little bit of imposter syndrome in there. I really don't think that's the case. I think the professional background is incredibly unique, and so is Namibian. So I think schools are really, really going to like that. I had a fantastic time in Windhoek a few years ago, and if you're from Windhoek, in fact, even if you're not, just get in touch. I'd love to hear about your background. All right, next profile, Mal.
Yes. Next profile. Now this is someone who doesn't have any safety schools, and we'll see why.
Okay.
Yep, very confident. The 28, male, Asian, very high cost of living city.
Okay.
So paying a lot. Undergrad, 3.6 GPA engineering at a state school. They're saying, okay, it's a state school, but it was a very well-known state school. Sending a lot of engineers to Apple, to SpaceX. Masters of Computer Science online degree, 3.8 GPA. They've taken the GRE, they've got a 337. With that, schools, they're applying, again, not to any safeties. With this economy, okay to work. It's M7 or nothing. Reach is Sloan, Boost, maybe HSW. Target, though, is Haas, part-time MBA. So that's interesting. They'd like to work alongside the degree. Work experience, they've got 5 years of work experience in total, currently working with a UK management consultancy in their engineering branch. One promotion, currently at the pre-MBA rank, and then they need, of course, the MBA to be promoted. Working in the medical device, health and fitness, semiconductor, industrial robotics space. They've been here for 3 years. Previously, we were project manager at a national lab working in fusion. The lab made national news as well. So it's a well-known lab. Extracurriculars, we've got some intern recruitment program that they've led. Also some light volunteering, non-profit as a tutor. Undergrad, they had a few in leadership positions at the engineering club, led the engineering team, and was VP as well.
Okay.
I've skimmed past their career goals. Career goals, product management, hard tech company, think Waymo, think NVIDIA. And why they want to get into an MBA, they have a good understanding of how to design hardware. Now they want to know what makes a good product. They want to get into the business side of it.
Commercializing, basically. Yep.
Yes. Yeah, and
Good.
that's their profile. What do you think?
Okay, let's start at academics as usual. 3.6 GPA is bang in line with the M7 average of about 3.6. Not worried about it being at a state school. It sounds like the school in question is very well regarded. 337 GRE is very, very nice. That's a very high GRE score, and in particular, a balanced score. So I very often see a 337 with a 170Q, but a balanced 168 verbal, that is an exceptionally strong GRE score. So academics, really, really nice so far. In terms of professional, right, engineering and management consulting is quite a nice kind of mix of sectors. It sounds like what OP's been doing, especially on the engineering side, has really been quite groundbreaking. And the research facility made national news. I would love a career narrative essay that begins with that headline of the newspaper, for example, or the article that came out about the research facility. And you say, like, my contribution was this, but it made me realize this, and that's why I want to pivot into that. It could be such a nice narrative there. So that's on the professional side. I like that, a nice mix of different sort of forms of engineering, basically. And I think schools are going to love that. I think that the extracurriculars, this is probably the weakest area of the profile, Mal. Lead intern recruitment program. Okay, that's going to do most of the lifting here. So a light volunteer at a nonprofit as a tutor, loads of people do that. That's not going to carry any weight. Their schools see that so often. So forget about that. And then in college, the leadership positions, that stuff's during college. So that doesn't carry much weight either. So really, the EC quality is going to come down to this intern recruitment program. Can OP talk about creating structure? Can OP talk about growth of the recruitment program? Maybe some other impact. That is going to be what matters. And OP, if you're asked like a leadership essay, etc., that is the theme that I would focus on really clearly. Okay, in terms of demographic, Asian male. We don't know more details than that, but I think it's fair to say overrepresented. And it sounds like, reading between the lines, if OP is in a very high cost of living city and is considering the Haas part-time program, my guess is they're in San Francisco. And so that's a decent set of schools, very ambitious. But I think, frankly speaking, given the GPA, given the GRE, given the work experience across countries, really groundbreaking research, great goals here. We'll talk about these goals in a bit, but I really like this idea of engineer moving into product management. That is a classic goal that we've seen before. So in sum, the profile I think is very, very strong. And I think OP should be targeting M7.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a reach for them right now. Um, so they explain why they need an MBA. It is to fill those gaps in the knowledge of what makes a good product. So does
Yeah.
the story make sense? Or is a PM at a hard tech company, is that too specific a goal? Is the question.
I love that goal. Honestly, Mal. I mean, you know this from working on the essays, the way that the link, we need to be able to draw a connection between what you've been doing in the past and what you want to do in the future. If that gap is too big, it can be really difficult to explain your goals. But this engineering experience with a bit of management consulting in there as well as a sort of as for context, that's really, really nice experience to set up a product management at a hardware technology company, a Waymo and NVIDIA. You know, the companies making like Fitbit watches, those Whoop is another one. Like there's lots and lots of opportunities in that space. And I think OP is really well qualified to do that. And also, crucially, OP can explain, I think where this is going to get nice, OP, is really explaining where that hardware tech is going to be in. Right. So the difference between somebody saying like, I care a lot about my health and I want to go to Whoop versus like, I've seen how my commute to school when I was a kid was an hour and I used to take the bus. I've seen the importance of transportation. I want to go to Waymo.
Yeah.
That choice of industry is going to be really important. And if you can combine these goals with an industry that really is like something you genuinely care about, it could come across incredibly strongly. I like the goals, Mal.
Yeah. Um, Another concern about their work experience that they had was that a lot of their accomplishments are technical. The projects that they work on typically they are early stage pre-production, not really much, dollar impact amounts that they can assign there. In general, OP is having trouble translating their technical accomplishments for a business audience. Any tips?
Yeah, this is fair. So, just how your goal is to become an engineer that's thinking a bit more commercially, this is sort of consistent with that. How can you show progress and concrete achievements in the space that you're in? Right, a few things. I mean, user growth, right? Even if something is not profitable or whatever, like you can still show that you can demonstrate user growth. You can demonstrate progression of a product. For example, it was in the early stages, we were in the design stage and I did something and my contribution moved it through to the manufacturing phases, for example. So you can demonstrate concrete progression that way of the product that you've worked on. You can talk about, for example, anything relating to stakeholders can be really solid. For example, I onboarded a new stakeholder, or I onboarded a new supplier, or forged a new partnership with a certain client. Anything that is in that way that brings in new stakeholders, that is seen as a concrete achievement that you can put your name to. Also, anything that is in terms of like efficiency, right? A process that used to take X hours now takes 20% less hours, for example. Anything that is process and efficiency related, you can show improvement in. Yeah, it's not a dollar number, but it's, proxy to dollar numbers if you're improving efficiency. So that's another way. I would also say, and kind of really, I don't think we've gone, oh yeah, OP does talk about promotions here. That is another proxy for performance. Right? Yes, you can launch a product and get new users and get new revenue or whatever, but ultimately all of that ends up as a promotion. So if you can point to a particular promotion, that is also a concrete achievement. And it's a classic way of ending like a leadership story is you start with the situation, the challenge, the action that you took, the result, and then you end with, and I was promoted by my manager in recognition of this great work. And it's kind of like a nice ending that really demonstrates and solidifies your achievements. So that's a great way. And then the other thing I just want to highlight is that all of this stuff I've just said, get it on the resume as well, right? Numbers on the resume. Try and aim for like every other line of the resume having a number in it, whether that's a percentage increase, whether that's users, whether that's any other form of progression. Try and point to concrete achievements on the resume, not just in the essays. And also, if your recommenders can point to concrete achievements, that's also valuable as well.
Okay. Finally, last question OP has is they're shopping for admissions consultants right now. They've been
Mhm.
doing it themselves. They've been using applicant labs. Is it too late to get a consultant for round 2?
Short answer is no. So generally speaking, we are filling up round 2, but generally speaking, we start the work in round 2 around the back end of September when round 1 is finished. So really, you've got a couple of months to get your consultant set up for round 2. One idea that I had is my colleague John Cheng, has a very strong track record of getting engineers into Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. So, OP, if you're watching, my suggestion would be to go to samweeks.com, book a chat with John Cheng via the schedule free chat button in the top right hand corner. Really, really good place to start.
Okay, great.
All right,
Yeah,
next
we'll get in
profile.
touch with John. Let's move on to the next profile. Then I think we've covered everything. We've got
Mhm.
a sustainability engineer from Canada.
Okay.
They are male, first generation immigrants, so South Asian. First in their family, first generation college goer as well. Canadian University undergrad GPA 2.9. That's a toughie. They've got professional engineer certificates. They've done their PMP and also the Scrum Master. Work experience, they've got 8 years in government roles, in progressive engineering roles. Currently, they're working as a senior engineer leading a multi-million infrastructure and sustainability project. Personally selected, very active on DEI strategy as well. They've led teams of engineers and unionized staff. Extracurriculars, they mentor junior engineers through Canada's Professional Engineering Association. They also lead a small team that funds and delivers infrastructure projects in underserved villages abroad. And that, I see a good story coming there. It says it's inspired by family roots, by personal stories. Very interesting essay photo. General stats, GRE is 337, another really, really good score. The 32, slightly on the older side. Goals, short term, MBB or strategy consulting, USA, Canada. Long term, in sustainable infrastructure investing or advisory, especially in equitable, climate resilient urban development. What do you think?
Yeah, lots to say here. I think, okay, let's start with the academic side, right? That's a crap GPA, right? We know that 2.9 is well below the average of all of the schools that we tend to work with, but it is offset by a very strong GRE score, 337. It's really, really nice. And it looks like there is an improving trend as well. Last 2 years was a 3.5. In other words, it sounds like OP had a really bad first couple of years. And OP, I would strongly advise to write about that in your optional essay. And we can talk about what that exactly would look like. So from an academic standpoint, poor GPA, good GRE, offset. Let's say it kind of balances out, mediocre. Professional, right? 8 years of work experience, going to be on the high end. And that's 8 years now, I assume, which means that if you're submitting, let's say OP gets an application in round 1, that means it's going to be more like 9 years of application of experience by September 2026. That is a lot of experience. Now, what you know, Mal, as I always say, experience in MBA applications is okay if you can point to management experience. And it looks like OP can. So from a work experience perspective, a profile that I would call divisive, right? Yes, experience, but with the management that comes from that. So some schools are going to look at that and think, okay, we're going to bring in OP to contribute that management experience to the school, to the cohort. Yeah. Okay, from a extracurricular perspective, the so the mentoring junior engineers, every third person we speak to has like, I did professional mentorship, right? We don't. Schools have kind of negate that a bit now. It's kind of become overplayed. But this leading a team that funds and delivers infrastructure projects like wells, homes, and schools in underserved villages, that is interesting. Particularly if OP went on ground and went and actually helped build and dig a well, there could be an incredibly strong story there potentially on the extracurriculars. Demographic, overrepresented as in sort of South Asian, Canada, but first gen, which helps. So I would say sort of neutral on the demographic perspective. Now, goals, this is where I have an issue. The good news is that that can be fixed. These goals suck. Right. OP, if you are trying to play to your strengths here, you are an engineer that has led multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects. There are some things that you can do that other people can't, right? Anything that is sort of sustainability engineering related, you are going to have an edge over other people. But management consulting, applying to management consulting, I'm afraid is not one of them, right? There are lots of people going to be applying to business school who you're going to put yourself up against, who have either got, management consulting experience at a big four and they want to go to MBB. You're going right in the firing line of those people. You're going to have people who are already at an MBB, who are sponsored for their MBA, having it completely paid for, and going to go back to an MBB with a guaranteed offer, and you're going up against them as well. Not going to work. And there's going to be people, frankly, with a strong GPA who are saying, I don't really know what I want to do, so I'm going to go to consulting. Some of them have got a strong GPA. They'll bring up the stats for the school, and the school will be like, okay, we'll let a vague goal pass because of these strong stats. You don't have that luxury. So I would strongly recommend that a better goal would be to focus on something, tell the school about an infrastructure focused goal, right? Like joining an infrastructure development company. That's way more unique and interesting. And if you must do consulting, then choose a sustainability or impact consulting firm, the Dahlbergs of the world, and at least differentiate yourself a little bit that way. But I don't like those goals, Mal, for those reasons. But overall, a solid profile, lots to work with, but yeah, also some clear red flags.
Related to this, his goals, OP's a little worried about his story as well. So now they've got this public sector engineering background. How can he frame his story better?
Yeah. Look, the classic thing that I would explore if I was working with OP as a client would be the first question I'd ask is, tell me about this project that you're working on and the impact it's had. Right? Opening with a story about an important project that you worked on and something impactful that you were doing, and then having a eureka moment, right? So maybe it's, I was working on this amazing project and I identified a problem, and after the MBA, I want to go and fix that problem. Or I identified something I'm passionate about, and after the MBA, I'm in the pivot to pursue that passion. Opening with the story of an impactful project and then using that to explain and frame the goals, that is to me the obvious way to frame these goals. And by the way, it could be, it could be from the infrastructure and sustainability work, but it also could be from the DEI side, right? If OP has done something impactful on the DEI side and again, could have discovered a problem, a systemic issue, a challenge, DEI isn't being taken seriously in infrastructure, and I want to go and change that. Whatever the challenge is, use that to frame your goals. I hope that makes sense. So, and then the other thing is use that to set up a very specific goal, right? So if you're using the infrastructure story, then set up like, I want to be a director at a sustainability infrastructure company like Aqua Power in the Middle East, where I'm going to build desalination plants and power plants, for example. Like that being super specific will allow you to connect that story to your goals so that you're really clearly tackling a specific problem. And that's what schools will respond to.
Yeah. All right. So speaking of schools, they want to get into M7s and the T15s. Which schools fit with this profile, and among the M7s and T15, what are their chances?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Look, that GPA is going to be a killer. It really is. And, the average GPA of top schools is 3.6. The schools are going to really have an issue with that, particularly the M7s. I think, throw an application at some of the M7s by all means, but do be very careful. I would say, you got to aim lower as well. My gut is to be looking, I think OP should be looking at T20. I think that's the area that OP should be focusing on. If OP does go with the consulting goals, I'll humor him here. A few schools that jump out as MBB recruitment hotspots: Darden, Ross, Haas, UNC Keenan Flagler, UCLA Anderson, Duke, Johnson, NYU Stern, Tuck, and Yale are all in that sub M7 bucket. But we know historically, like McKinsey have gone to those campuses to recruit, for example. So that would be the set of target schools for somebody who's not M7, but is targeting consulting. As I say, I don't think consulting personally should be the goal, but maybe those schools are appealing nonetheless.
All right, I think we've covered all of OP's concerns. Shall we move on?
Yeah, let's do it.
Profile 5. Now this is an athlete. We see quite a few athletes come in with for MBA applications. Always an interesting story. They're white, they're male, 25 years old, looking to apply to Fuqua in early admissions. Johnson, Keenan Flagler, Owen, and Scheller, they want to apply in round 1. They'll have 4 years at matriculation. Undergrad, they did their engineering at the top 3 public uni, varsity athlete in biking and track, GPA 3.2, 2.8 after the first 2 years, so a bit low on the lower side there. Completed 3 summer internships for business analytics, software engineering, and data science. Now this last data science internship, they converted to a full-time role. That's where they're at currently, data engineer, no promotions. But they did manage summer interns on their projects. GRE 322, higher in quant, a bit low on the lower side. On verbal goals, they're looking to go into consulting or IP. Letter of rec, former boss, who's now at a Big 10 school, a teacher. Any extracurriculars, there's some volunteering work, local community center, 3 times per week, about 6 hours, lightish. A very significant extracurricular is the sports. They're semi-elite athlete. They still participate. They still win cash awards at local events. And they're also in the process of running all of the world's major marathons.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. What a cool story to dive into. Right, let's talk about this from an overall perspective first. Right, academic. Right, 322. It's not a train wreck, but it's not great either for these schools. And it's the same for the GPA. The 3.2 is not a train wreck, but it's not great for these schools. And if you combine them together and you have both of them below average, it's not a great academic look. And obviously with the varsity athlete story, we can kind of see what happened. OP just wasn't that focused on grades, and maybe picked it up in the last couple of years, but towards the end, but still ended up with a 3.2. So lukewarm, to say the least, on the academic front. The professional side, look, an interesting mix here between the data engineer, data side, which is like one bucket, and sports, which is another bucket. And I'm really interested in the interplay between them, or the overlap between those two areas could make some really interesting goals. So I think professional, potentially strong. We need to know a little bit more. Not ideal that OP can't demonstrate any promotions, but also not the end of the world, especially if OP can demonstrate progression in other ways. Extracurriculars, 2 great extracurriculars, right? This volunteering at a local community center teaching kids, like that's super cool, right? You've been asked about a leadership story, learning to lead, like hyperactive kids, like, yeah, that could be really, really good. And then also the athleticism and the sports. We know that athletes and sport, sporty people can get some really good leadership stories from that, right? Particularly if it's team sports. Now, I'm not sure OP was really involved in any team sports. It looks like it was more as you said, biking, etc. But I imagine there's still some team component to this. Even if it's like my coach and my competitors who I considered friends, and you can still form a leadership story out of that potentially. So the extracurricular is really strong point on the profile. Demographic, white, male, overrepresented. Not the end of the world, but definitely overrepresented. Interesting, OP talks about LOR. Former boss is a really good recommender. Might need another one depending on the schools, but the first recommendation, it certainly looks very strong. And then in terms of goals, this is a big flag for me, a big red flag for me. This idea of I want to go into consulting or PE or IB just screams like I don't know what I want to do, and I want to go into business and make money, and it's just so generic and so vague and rubbish. So I would scratch that goal, and I mean that we've caught it early enough, so that's not an issue. But I think the key for OP in terms of goals is to focus on this interplay between data and sports. For example, joining a sports betting company. It's not ideal from a sort of ethical whatever argument, gambling, whatever, but just as an example of overlapping sports and data, that's awesome. Or for example, I have a good friend who does strategy at the Toronto Maple Leafs, right? That brings data and sports together, and those are the kinds of roles that that schools are interested in seeing from an applicant like this. They're the kind of roles that only you are qualified for. We think about consulting and investment banking, you are not the most qualified for those roles by a long shot. So you should not throw your hat in that ring. Okay. I would say sort of just slight caveat to that is once you're on the program, if you decide to recruit for consulting, fine, give it a go. Recruit for IB, fine, give it a go. But don't tell the school that in your application because they'll just give you a spot to someone else.
Yeah. Few concerns the OP has. This isn't in their main post, but in the comments, they're thinking, okay, I was at a top US school. You said that the GPA was lukewarm, but they're like, okay, but I was at a top school. Do I get a boost for that? Does my school pedigree matter? Will it offset my GPA?
A bit. It will look, when they're looking at your GPA, there's two things they care about. Well, there's two ways that they're coming at it. One is from like their average, right? What is the average GPA of the class? And that's because they get ranked on this. It's one of the factors that plays into the US News ranking and the Financial Times ranking, etc. And the other is, are you going to struggle with the program? Are you going to struggle with, for example, the quant aspects of the program? And I would argue that in OP's case, probably not going to help the school's average in terms of GPA or GRE for that matter. But also it's not so bad that OP's not going to be able to handle the difficult parts of the program. And that second part, the difficult parts of the program, is where they're going to get reassurance from, okay, it's a 3.2, but at least it was at a good school. And therefore OP's not dumb and will be able to contribute to the classes, if not positively to our average.
All right. And just like reflecting on OP's work experience, they've had no promotions, and they say that nobody at the company has been promoted either. So in their narrative, how do they demonstrate this upwards progression, the leadership skills that they need for an MBA?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a few things that I would focus on here. One of them is you can demonstrate progression without actual promotions in terms of like just responsibilities. In your resume, OP, you should be really going from like your bullet points should be getting sequentially more impressive as you go up. Maybe you can divide your resume into projects, for example, and within each project, you kind of have a different title, and those titles can be getting steadily more impressive, perhaps. So in terms of you can tell them about increased responsibilities, even if those responsibilities weren't reflected in promotions. The other thing is key is informal management. So what people typically associate with a promotion is you start managing other people, right? But it's not just about managing other people. You're also managing budgets. You're also making decisions, right? And so you might be able to demonstrate that you're managing bigger budgets, that you're making bigger decisions, even though your title hasn't changed. So that's another great way of demonstrating progression. And I would say that of those, the budgets is the big one, right? Companies do not entrust serious budgets to people who they don't trust. End of. And so if you can demonstrate, like, the first time I managed a budget was maybe after a couple of years, that demonstrates progression as well. So a few things in there. Hopefully OP can identify, one of those resonates and OP can identify some progress.
Mhm. Okay. OP's also mentioned this schools, like very specific schools, not just, I want to get T15. They know which schools they're applying to. What are the chances that these schools, where can they get it?
Yeah. Put very simply, I'm not enthusiastic about Johnson or Fuqua. I think those two, between them, get so many applicants with strong GPAs and strong GMATs that, and including athletes, that I'm wary about those. The clients that I've worked with who've got into those schools with mediocre stats have got something exceptional somewhere in their profile. And OP, I'm not really seeing it. So I'm a bit wary of those two schools. I would consider them very much reach. By all means, throw an application in there, but don't be downhearted if you don't get them. For the others, the Keenan Flaglers, the Owens, and the Shedder, I think that's where OP should be focusing. That's OP's bread and butter. And I think if he didn't get into one of those with in round one with a solid application, I'd be surprised. I think something's probably gone wrong. And hopefully he can get several of them and maybe even negotiate a little scholarship.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've thoroughly roasted OP's profile right here. Let's move on to our bonus question.
Cool.
Networking School Info 101. Okay, I know this may sound a bit helpless, but I've just taken the GMAT. I want to begin researching schools and networking while beginning my fall 26 application. This is something I struggled with in undergrad, and I'm hoping if there are any resources or any methods I can use to go about reaching to people, schools, and getting any information that I need, even about placements. And OP's a bit apologetic right here because I think it's a bit of a helpless question, but I'm sure we can help, right?
We can definitely help with this. OP, don't feel too helpless, confused. Everybody goes through this process. Everybody has this moment of realization. Taking the GMAT, okay, what now? Well, there's, I think, three key things that I want to focus on. The first one is when you were talking here about placements across industries. That you can get yourself from employment reports that the schools publish. You should not be going to an admissions event to a student and asking, hey, how do you place in consulting? Because those numbers are in the employment report. And if you are, and this is the thing, there is such a thing as a dumb question in this world, right? Everyone will say, oh, there's no such thing as dumb questions. Well, here there is. You'll look silly if you come in with a dumb question. And asking about like consulting placements, that's a dumb question. Why? Because it's published in the employment report. So find it there and do your basic research first before you start asking dumb questions to people. But when you've done that research, then you can start justifiably, asking people questions. And the first and foremost, the most obvious sort of step one in the reach out process is signing up for events. Sign up for events. Pretty much every school has these online or in-person events that they host where they send admission staff to go and meet students. Sometimes they also have an alum involved, or they have a current student and they bring them along and they ask them to talk about the program. So you can attend those events. Don't be shy. There's no point attending and just, not asking a question, or if it's virtual, not turning your camera on. No benefit to that. But go there, show your face and ask intelligent questions, and they will remember you. And follow up with a thank you mail, and they will remember you. And follow up with another question, and they will remember you. These are really just best practice to get your name in front of them and have them remember, so that when your application comes across their desk, they will recognize the application. When you hit submit, you can send them an email saying, hey, admissions, thanks so much for your help during the so-and-so event. I've just hit submit on my application. And guess what? They're going to go and they're going to find it, and they're going to know the face that's applying, and you're already at a little advantage. So going to those events is a really big one. And then the other thing is, the other one is reaching out to individuals. Now, typically this doesn't mean professors, they won't give you much time, but admissions will typically, sometimes some schools will speak to you one-on-one. Alumni will often speak to you one-on-one. Current students will often speak to you one-on-one. And my advice here, I always say to people, is LinkedIn is your friend, right? Just get really active on LinkedIn. First, polish up your profile and make sure your profile looks nice and serious so that when you message them and they take a look, you don't look like a waste of time. And then ask intelligent questions, right? I saw that you successfully pivoted from engineering into product management. I'd love to hear how your MBA helped you do that. All right. Asking intelligent questions one-on-one and setting up calls one-on-one. LinkedIn is the way to do that. The other thing here is just to get into the nuts and bolts of this. As you're searching for people, focus on people that you have mutual connections with. Obviously, people that you know, former colleagues, people that studied at undergrad with you. They're a lot more likely to reply to your message. And at first, starting with those people, that's how you'll get the ball rolling. And then during those conversations, you can ask them, hey, that was really helpful. Do you happen to know anyone who is focused on aerospace? And they can set you up with the next conversation. Yeah, sure. Let me introduce you to Bobby, who works at Airbus and did his MBA with me. And boom, you've got your introduction for your next conversation. And that will snowball, because then you can open the next conversation with, I was at the event A and I spoke to Samir B, who gave me your contact details, and I figured out the following, and I was wondering if I could get more information from you about, and then you come across as informed. And these conversations will become more and more insightful and more useful as you go. So hopefully that has answered the question.
Yeah, I think that was some really good information right there. I think that covers all of the profiles and bonus questions we have today.
Fantastic. Well, anybody watching, if you enjoyed our little roast today, get in touch. You go to samweeks.com. You can book an intro call with me or any of my colleagues, any of our colleagues. We can also, if you'd like us to roast your profile, send us a DM over Reddit, and we will do our best to include your profile in our next roasts. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel if you want to watch more roasts. Mal and I do these every week, and sometimes we bring in other colleagues from the team. So we'll be doing plenty more roasts in the future. Mal, lovely to catch up. Thank you so much for your roasting help and all your difficult questions. And I'll see you next week.
All right. See you next week.
Yeah. See you. Bye.
Bye.